Hello, I'm George Liston, CA, and welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. When Jane Goodall first set out for Africa in 1960, she could not have imagined the enormous impact her life and work would have on our understanding of our nearest relatives, the chimpanzees, and of ourselves. Her pioneering efforts in primatology, conservation, and development have joined scientific and humanitarian concerns in a way that reminds us of the interrelated fates humans and animals, men and women, rich and poor, all share on this beautiful but small and imperiled planet. Perhaps most importantly, her life is a contribution in itself, as an example of what one person can do to inspire change. And my guest is Jane Goodall. Jane, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure, an honor actually, to have you here, Jane. And let me begin with a question based on my reading of several of your books, including, of course, this one, In the Shadow of Man. I felt, as I read them, Jane, that the underlying message, perhaps the first and most important, was that we have to overcome this barrier, if you will, this mentality of having an us versus them view of the rest of the animal world. Is that correct? And if so, what's the good of that?
It's absolutely so. And I think for too long, although ordinary people have always understood that animals have feelings and personalities. I mean, you can't share your life in a meaningful way with a dog or a cat or a guinea pig or whatever and not know that.
Yes.
Absolutely. But certainly in the early 60s, when ethology, the study of behavior, was a young science, the scientists believed it was very important to be objective, and this had to be a hard science. Mm-hmm. And therefore you couldn't talk about personality or mind, rational thought, or feelings in anything except the human animal. Mm-hmm. And so this is how matters stood when I went to Cambridge University. And I had no degree at that time. I should have been totally intimidated by these wise professors, but instead I thought back to my childhood. Mm-hmm. And the dog who had been my teacher.
And Jubilee, the little...
Jubilee, that was a toy chimpanzee, yes, right. I had when I was 1.5. Mm-hmm. But my whole childhood had really made me ready to stand up to that challenge, really, of my own ideas.
I'm tempted, that's a wonderful answer, Jane, because it reminds me that we all might have been well served by the fact that you were so naive when you went out to Kenya, to Tanzania. And in that regard, I honestly think, because you didn't have the scientific thing to sort of constrain you, when you gave the chimpanzees names, Flo and Fagin and Fabian and David Greybeard and the rest, I think that was a marvelous step.
It really, really was. And it has changed gradually over the years. More and more scientists have started naming their animals. Mm-hmm. And, the issue at stake here is if animals are just things, are just objects, then it doesn't matter what you do to them.
Exactly.
And we carry this same thinking, us versus them, into our interactions with other people. And that leads to so many conflicts.
That's an excellent point, because one of the reasons your work is so important is because it tells us a lot about ourselves. And when Louis Leakey sent you off to do this in the first place, I'm sure as the great scientist he was, he had an interest in what we could learn about our own past.
He did. From
this. And do you think that's been done, or is being done? We're learning about ourselves as we learn about chimpanzees? Absolutely.
I think that learning about the creature who is closest to us on this planet, and now that they've unraveled the chimp genome, we already knew that we differed from them genetically in the composition of the genes, of the DNA, by only about 1%.
Exactly.
Apparently now we're even closer.
Oh, goodness.
And the main difference is the expression of the genes, which can be influenced by environment. So, there we are, so close to them. We could have a blood transfusion from a chimp, but not a gorilla. Brain more like ours than that of any other living creature. Behavior uncannily like ours.
Yes.
I mean, communication,
right.
Kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting on the back, swaggering.
Exactly.
Done in the same context we do it.
Yeah.
So the more you find the similarities, the more you can ask this so crucial question: what's the big difference? What has pushed our brain into becoming the intellectual creatures that we can be with the proper background.
You credit language for a lot of this, don't you?
This spoken language, this, you and I could sit here and we could discuss things that maybe people listening or looking have never seen or heard of.
The abstract, the imagined.
Yes, but with words we can make pictures. And we can teach our children about things that are not present. And now that we've moved into the electronic era, I mean, we can have this kind of communication instantaneously around the world.
Right.
And I can't help feeling that a mechanism which enables discussion to take place. I have an idea, and I tell you about it, and you say, oh, that's great, but, and then you add something.
Exactly.
And if we had a group, this idea, which was good in the beginning, might get better and better. Well, that stimulates the intellect.
Exactly.
And that's where we really differ, this explosive development of the intellect.
I want to talk about this marvelous similarity, and perhaps in a more disturbing way in just a moment, Jane, because you also found some things that are not so wonderful and comforting in chimpanzee behavior. Let me ask you a question, though, about my personal favorite here. I can't resist talking about Mike.
Mike.
I like Mike. Mike is a male chimpanzee who assumes leadership role. But to me, the striking thing was he comes from nowhere. I mean, he's picked on and beaten about as a lad, but makes himself a leader through ferocious displays using kerosene cans. And that shows a lot of ingenuity. I'd like you to talk a bit about Mike, Jane, if you will, and tell me, because this is the one thing I wasn't clear on, what does that leadership mean? They'd spent a long time, the male chimps, in becoming the leader, but what does that allow them to do? Do they run the group about, or what?
Okay, well, first of all, unfortunately, we don't know Mike's childhood. He was adult when I arrived. He had this motivation for high ranks. Although he was about number 11 when he started, and all these males were big and strong and aggressive who ranked higher than he did, he just had this brain. And all the chimps, every single male at one time or other, had used a can from lying around my camp in one of these charging displays. You know, they race across the
Get very
ground,
big and
hair
run about.
bristling, stamping with feet, slapping with
Done it
hands,
myself.
looking as big and dangerous as they can, and they hurl rocks, drag branches. Well, he found a can. All of them did. Only Mike used that chance discovery of the noise it made to his own advantage. So he learned to keep 3 of them ahead of him. No other male did that. And they were intimidated, of course. 3 of these noisy 4-gallon cans. And so he attained that top place. He managed to defend it even when we took the cans away, although he went through a terrible time of, instead of dragging 1 branch, he had to drag 5. He just wanted to keep this advantage he had. And so, okay, finally he relaxes, he's top-ranking male. So what advantages? In a troop of, for example, baboons or most monkeys, the top male, he's able to control, to a large extent, access to females. And that seems to be the main reason, or access to food as well. But chimp society is not like that, because it frequently breaks up into tiny groups where the top male doesn't have any particular advantage. And it almost seems at times that for chimpanzees like us, there is a real benefit in having the subservience of others. In other words, power for power's sake.
You know something, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that's what I was thinking. As I read this, I said, you know, at the end of the day, what does he have? Bragging rights, and he can lord it about the other males for a bit, much as the rest of us try to do when we can.
It's one of the real similarities with chimps and humans, this male, you know.
You know, to carry on this theme, Jane, and I mentioned a moment ago, there's a darker side, because you discovered tool making and meat eating, but also war. And it almost seemed as though strategically designed war campaigns at certain points, you know, going to the edge of their territory and waiting for lone males or something to leap upon and set off battles. Because we are so close, and because they did that, I want to quote to you one of your own statements and ask you why you feel it, why you said it, and why you believe it obviously so strongly. Keeping that in mind, the chimpanzee behavior, you have said, quote, "People say that war and violence are inevitable. I say rubbish." Now, if we're so alike, how can you say that with such certainty about us?
Well, the reason people say that is if we believe in a common ancestor, an ape-like, human-like creature, 6-7 million years ago, then behavior that's common to chimpanzees today and humans today may have stemmed from that common ancestor, which means that this violence, this warlike behavior, may have come with us in our genes right through our own human evolution. And this is why people say, well, then it's part of our genes. It's our genetic inheritance to be violent and aggressive. And there's no question, we have inherited violent tendencies. So you can't look around the world and not know that that's true. But more than any other creature, because of our sophisticated brain, we can control our genetically determined behavior unless we're sick through willpower. Most of us do. We don't go around, sometimes you feel like clobbering somebody, but you don't do it. You control it. And we learn to fall in with accepted social norms, which is why in war it all comes out, because the norm changes and you're expected to go and be violent. But we also have to remember that yes, maybe we've inherited these aggressive tendencies. We've had them always with us. But too, chimpanzees show love, compassion, and altruism.
That they do. Yes. Marvelously so. So the answer here, Jane, in essence, is that we have the self-control, and we should be able to exert the will to use that if we're wise. I want to expand our conversation a bit, Jane, because one of the things that I think is most admirable about what you've done is that there almost 5 decades now of observation of chimpanzees in Gombe and a concern about their fate, but you have linked it, and this is, to be quite candid with you, this is something I haven't appreciated in the work of other people. You've linked it to human fate. There's no sense that the animals survive alone, but with humans. And in that connection, through your Jane Goodall Institute, there's something I'd love for you to talk about now, and that's the Takari or Take Care project.
Takari or Take Care.
Yeah, well, does it work both ways?
Yes, I call it Take Care.
You take care?
Yes.
I like that. Take care indeed.
Take care.
It's development in a sense with a difference, to use a phrase. And how would you describe it, Jane? What's the difference? What makes it?
Well, it began because I flew in a small plane along the eastern shore of Lake Tanganyika, which is where this tiny national park, Gombe, is. And I hadn't realized until that moment, which is about 15 years ago, the extent of the deforestation outside the park. Bare slopes, soil erosion, mudslides, people obviously struggling to survive, more people than the land could support, nowhere to go, people. And it was very obvious that because of the refugees coming in and the normal population growth, it was a very bad situation. Right. How could we even think of saving the chimps? This tiny jewel in an oasis in bare hills. So clearly, the only solution to me seemed, let's try and improve the lives of the people in an environmentally sustainable way, so that from the beginning, Take Care was conceived as very holistic. And never ever was there a situation where white people went into a village and said, well, you're very poor, so we're very sorry for you, and this is what we'll do. Because that's the misplaced aid that's really caused a lot of deterioration and changing proud people into beggars. So going into the village, the Tanzanian team going into the village, saying, what do you think would help you the most? These are the things we might be able to help you with, but what's important to you? And of course, conservation was way down. It was health, it was education, and food, growing food. So building that up first, building up the understanding, gradually introducing conservation education, and then realizing that all around the world, it's been shown that as women's education improves, family size drops. And something's got to change. This situation, I mean, it can't continue the way it is. Something will go. So we introduced from very early on ideas about family planning, HIV/AIDS education, women's rights, primary health care, especially for women and children, helping with the schools, but in such a way that they bought into it. It was their ideas. And we began with 12 villages with a grant from the EU. Now we're in 24. With USAID support. And we could be in far more, but we don't have the infrastructure.
I want to see you in far more. And actually, Jane, this is an opportunity for me to, if I may, have the personal meet the professional and tell you that when I read of Take Care, I was deeply moved. And one of the reasons is I personally very firmly believe that it's women's education in particular, in the midst of all these other things, that's, I think, the most revolutionary need in development. In other words, the more women get educated and free in many societies, the more they will progress and the societies will progress.
Yes. And of course, at the moment, girls don't get the chance boys do.
That's
If
right.
there's a very poor family and they can afford one, the boy goes to school. So we do have scholarships for girls to go through secondary school and beyond.
Which raises a very interesting point, because I went to your website and saw that on the Jane Goodall Institute, a person can, for the modest sum, $500 actually make it possible for a girl to do just that, go to school for a year. And so if you'll accept it, Jane, allow me to do that.
That is really lovely.
You're very, very welcome.
I wish there were more people like you.
I think there are a lot out there, and I think that watching this program and others and hearing you, they're going to be doing that, because when you affect a life, you give a young person, and particularly young women, a chance to get this kind of opportunity. Believe me, it's a lifelong gift in a sense.
And you know, there's another thing which I didn't realize until a few years ago. The main reason that girls who are in secondary school don't finish is because when they reach puberty, they can't stand the fact that in these villages, the latrines are stinky, dirty, filthy. And so we're providing these ventilation improved pit latrines, VIP latrines. I couldn't understand it when I first heard. And this also buys one of those.
Well, that's marvelous, Jane, absolutely. You know, actually, since we're talking, you're very welcome. And since we're talking about young people and children, an opportunity to bring up another program I know is very close to your heart, also began in Tanzania. I think you were visited by 15 or 16 kids about 15 or 16 years ago. And it led to something called Roots and Shoots, which is what?
Roots and Shoots is my passion. Because what's the point of my killing myself to save chimpanzees and forests if we're not educating new generations to be better stewards than we've been? So Roots and Shoots. Roots make a firm foundation. Shoots seem tiny, but to reach the sun, they can break through a brick wall. And if we see the brick wall as all the problems that we've inflicted on the planet, environmental and social, then this is hope. Hundreds and thousands of young people around the world can break through and make the world a better place.
You're a big believer in young people, aren't you?
I am, and the most important message for them, and all of us actually, is that each one of us makes a difference every day, and we all have a choice.
Right.
And so in the Roots and Shoots program, every group, and now we're in 96 countries with about 8,500 active groups, preschool through university and even beyond. And every group themselves, this is youth driven, select 3 projects to make the world better for people, for animals, including domestic animals, and for the environment, with a theme of learning to live in peace and harmony with yourself, your community, and eventually around the world.
That's wonderful. Are the groups in communication with each other?
Yes, we have a brand new website open and just probably sometime in October, rootsandshoots.org. And we just had a meeting of the leaders from 19 countries. I just come straight from that in the Netherlands, bringing together and you know, many of them are volunteers. And what they're doing, the way they're inspiring the youth, bringing this group together was one of the most exciting moments. It was like a vision that I had, and it's happening.
Right.
Change is happening as we speak.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me, Jane, that change is happening, and I think it's wisdom to focus on young people. They are the future. And they can start with these ideas, whereas the rest of us, you know, have got to get rid of a lot of baggage we've accumulated. Which brings me to this question I wanted to ask you for a long time. In all this work on development, and even with the youth, it's clearly directed that 80% of the world, which is underprivileged. So underprivileged is a too-weak word, actually.
Yes, too weak.
It's much too weak. But that leaves the other side of the equation, the 20% who are affluent. And that's our consumption patterns, I include myself, those of us who have and want to get more and more, clearly must be a problem. So how do you re-educate that 20%.
You work with young people. You have to. I mean, actually, it's amazing how much older people change. I'm very amazed and impressed by that. People say don't bother with the older people. That's not true. You just have to reach the heart. But we have to learn, and I think it's being forced upon us now. I mean, global warming is here. It's not just a figment of environmentalists' imagination. It's actually here, and we see the result of our extravagant ways. More and more people are beginning to realize that without meaning to be, the affluent have been selfish and greedy, and we want more than we need.
You know, you point out in your book, Harvest of Hope, for example, that this greed has adversely affected us. I mean, if you take our eating habits, for example, and our agricultural practices, it would be beneficial, I mean, sort of self-interested to make this change.
Yeah, it's affecting the environment, destroying it. It's affecting animal welfare. This intensive farming of animals for food makes you sick. People knew, if they would let themselves know, because so many people say, I love animals, I'm very sensitive, don't tell me. Well, okay, that's ridiculous. You go on eating the result of the cruelty. You know, I looked at this piece of meat on my plate when I knew about intensive farming, and I thought, well, what does that symbolize? It symbolizes fear, pain, death. I don't want to eat that. So I stopped just like that. But the main thing is it's the intensively farmed animals. It's horrendous for the animal and our health, because we get the antibiotics, we get the hormones, it's making us sick, it's building up resistance in the bacteria to all these antibiotics.
It's doing no good whatsoever to either creature.
Yeah, to any or the environment. Heavy meat eating has been described as a sin against the humanity of tomorrow.
That's poetic.
Ernest Laszlo.
You know, there's another aspect of animal consumption that's equally horrendous in a very different way, and affects the chimpanzees and other wildlife environments. That is the bushmeat issue, which you're very much concerned with.
Yes.
And that's, of course, the killing for food of chimpanzees and other creatures.
Commercial killing.
Commercial killing.
That's the key word, the commercial.
Right. Commercial killing.
Because the subsistence hunting's gone on forever.
Yeah, like Eskimos with whales and such.
Yes, and pygmies in the forest, living in harmony.
Right.
But now you get money coming in. And the logging companies and money. The logging companies in Africa, and Indonesia. I mean, it's not only Africa bushmeat, it's all over, all through Asia. But the logging companies into Africa, opening up with roads, this means the hunters can go where they couldn't go before. They get transport for the meat back, and they shoot everything, and sell it to the urban elite who pay more for it. It's
ship it abroad.
Culture, and ship tons of it abroad.
There was an agreement signed in Kinshasa in September of a year ago, exactly.
A year ago, exactly.
Has it done much good?
I think it's done a lot of good. It's certainly raised a lot of awareness in the African countries, and there's more, the governments are therefore more amenable to enforcing the laws that they all have. So endangered species should not be killed for food, but who cared? But now at least the NGOs on the ground have a better, they've got a sort of something backing them up. There's a law, and but so much more needs to be done.
Indeed, but that's very encouraging, Jane.
Very encouraging.
It reminds me of what's, actually a very obvious thing. Your association with Africa now is nearly 5 decades long, and actually began in your childhood when you wanted to go there against much opposition. Africa is an interesting topic in itself. I felt it's been the stepchild of world attention for far too long, and now it's becoming, in some circles at least, almost a trendy issue. What do you think of world attitudes toward Africa and the development of the continent? Are the right things being done, the right attention being paid, or is it?
Well, for so long, the wrong attention's been paid, and for so long, Africa was not really of great concern. It doesn't have oil, and all that. We won't go into that. But so there are so many signs of hope. I mean, I know Africa, I know Africans, and once they get opportunity, at least the people I know best, East Africa, there is so much energy, and so much love of life. And we have a new president in Tanzania, this is one of my big reasons for hope, President Kikwete. And he really cares about the environment. And he said to me when he'd been in office just a very short time, he said, you know, Jane, you and I both care about doing things today, the result of which will be seen in 30 years. But I want to do it anyway. Now, if we had more heads of state thinking in those terms,
yes.
wow.
In every country I moved to it.
Exactly, not just Africa. And there are others like him. And once they get the opportunity, and we can get rid of this crippling foreign debt.
Yes.
And you know, there's so much pressure on politicians in Africa to sell off huge areas of land for agribusiness, for example. And it's, you know, it's always this pressure of money and how are they going to make ends meet, so they sell off land and then poverty gets worse.
You know, I'm so glad to hear you say that, both because of your revelations about the spirit in Africa and the enormous human energies, but I think that point about debt relief is extremely valuable. That's what needs to be done.
It really, really does. Now, Roots and Shoots began in Tanzania, and everybody says it changed youth, starting in the capital, but spreading out. There was no volunteerism when Roots and Shoots began. And now it's changed. I mean, right across the entire country, there's kids doing Roots and Shoots.
Well, let me say right across the entire world, thanks to what you've done, Jane, there is change, and I deeply appreciate it, and I speak for many in saying that. Thank you very much, Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And for this,
I'm very
George,
welcome for that,
thank
too.
you.
And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue's also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. And please join us again right here next week. And thank you for watching. And thank you for talking. Thoroughly enjoyed it, Jane.